This is a production of Cornell University.
My name is Elena Maria Viramontes, and I'm the new director of the Creative Writing Program. At this time, I'd like to welcome you to the Fall 2008 absolutely exciting reading series made possible through the generous support of a few anonymous donors. If you are not informed about our series, please pick up a bookmark when exiting the reading, and it's these things here. Please don't forget, use it as a bookmark, and let me tell you. Malcolm Cowley once wrote that great literature arises from the satisfaction of two contradictory desires: the desire to be apart from the crowd and the desire to belong to a community of writers. A reader series like ours not only nurtures community, but also fills our hearts with a vocabulary of the soul, so once we return to our solitude, it is not one of loneliness. Each time we attend a reading, we, quote, transcend the limitations of our own lives to find out what it's like to be someone else, to recognize unmistakable aspects of ourselves staring back at us from the portrait of a stranger, unquote. This from Francine Prose. To recognize those unmistakable aspects in one another cultivates humanity and decency. In a world at war, the things that are most precious to us in this very room, the very act of reading, writing, and listening becomes a political act. We are lucky to be able to offer this humanity in our reader series, in our classrooms, in our beautiful publication, Epic. Luckier still, we have been able to do so for the last 100+ years. Next year, 2009, we will be celebrating our centennial +5 years of teaching creative writing at Cornell, and we'll have a year-long festival of writers returning to our campus. On the list of invitees are alumni Melissa Banks, Julie Schumacher, Juno Diaz, Stephen Onan, Manette Ansay, and Crystal Williams, just to name a few. Dear writers and students of literature, faculty, staff, and community, this is your official invitation to join our celebration. Now, before I introduce Lamar Heron, who will in turn introduce our first reader, I'd like to take this opportunity to ask the creative writing faculty in attendance to please rise. Please rise. And the emeritus, and the emeritus, please rise. Please, please. I just want to say, well, I want to say thank you to Alice Fulton, who is on leave but continues to mentor student poets and is in constant contact with this program via email and by phone. Thank you, Phyllis Janowitz, whose true spirit always permeates. Thank you, Michael Cole. Thank you, J. Robert Lennon, whose family obligation has pulled him away from today. Thank you, Ken McLean, for always bearing the great spirit that you are. Thank you, Maureen McCoy, for bringing love wherever you are. Thank you, Robert Morgan, who is teaching our poetry graduate workshop but is traveling at this time. He is always, always here in spirit. Thank you, Ernesto Quiñones. Thank you, Larry Van Cleef Estafanen. See, I kept practicing that so I wouldn't trip over. And thank you, Stephanie Vaughn, who is just an incredible figure for creative writing. Thank you, Lamar Heron. Thank you, Allison Laurie. Thank you, Dan McCall. Thank you, James McConkey. Thank you, Edgar Rosenberg. You have all created great love and great humanity in your classes, and never do we have the opportunity to say thank you. And I'm taking this opportunity to say thank you to my fellow colleagues and friends. Thank you. I would also like to extend our gratitude to the new chair, Alice Hansen. Is he here, Alice? Okay, there you go, Alice. Thank you. A supporter of creative writing, and to our new associate chair, Grant Farrad. And special hugs and kisses to Laurel Guy and to Marianne Marsh, who without them, this would be impossible to do. Yes, okay. I would also like to announce that after the reading, there will be a reception, and we do have an email list if you're interested in other events that Creative Writing will host. But without further ado, please, my colleague and friend, Professor Lamar Herron.
Good afternoon. As a creative writing teacher for 29 years in this illustrious university of ours, I always told my students, all writing is subversive. All writing subverts, to one degree or another, somebody's status quo. And any writing that doesn't is not the kind of writing I want to encourage in this class. One year, tired of getting boy meets girl in college town bar stories, I told my narrative writing class, the next story you turn into me, I want you to imagine reading out loud in some town square in a village in El Salvador. It was a year during the Civil War in El Salvador. People are in the square, but a war is going on, and those people don't have the time or stomach for frivolities. Your story doesn't have to be loud enough to compete with the noise of war. On the contrary, it can be very quiet, but it had better be real. Otherwise, standing there reading it to these war-wearied people, you will die of shame. For a while, I did get better stories, but the truth is, I haven't been anywhere near such a square or in the midst of a war. I did live nearly 4 years in Franco's Spain at the end of his dictatorship when things were less intolerant than they had been. And I did have friends who had family members thrown into jail. But perhaps my most vivid memory of Spain under Franco's rule came when my wife and I visited a friend in Tenerife, Carlos Pinto, who was both a neurologist and a well-known poet. I asked him if he was presently writing, and he took me up to his study, opened his filing cabinet, and showed me 3 manuscripts, complete to the last word and ready to go. Carlos Pinto was on Franco's blacklist, and it was a case of one more poet waiting for a dictator to die. Carlos then took me outside and pointed off toward West Africa and said that during World War II, they used to watch convoys of Allied warships steaming up the coast and wondered when one would veer off and come liberate them. I can still see those 3 immaculately typed manuscripts waiting to leave that island. These remarks are about persecuted writers and writers for whom words are a matter of life and death. In 2000, as Director of Creative Writing, I attended a meeting in which Cornell University was asked to participate in a national City of Asylum program. It was proposed that every 2 years, a writer at risk in his own country would be invited to Ithaca to live. He or she would be given a living stipend and an apartment, and through Cornell, employment with the title Visiting Scholar. I am pleased and proud to report that Cornell quickly accepted the proposal, and later Ithaca College, Hobart Smith, and most recently Wells College agreed to contribute. At the time, I thought this was wonderful. Not only would a writer get the peace and protection he needed to write, but writing students, both undergrads and grads, would benefit enormously from close contact with someone who had put his life on the line in order to practice his craft. We have gotten the best of writing students here for years, but if Cornell suffers from anything, from a writer's point of view, it is from geographical isolation. now in some small but meaningful measure, the world would come to Cornell's door. Since that year 2000 meeting, the Ithaca City of Asylum program, one of only 3 such programs in the country, has hosted 3 writers from China, Iran, and Swaziland, and has just begun to host a 4th, Irakli Kakabadze from the Republic of Georgia. Irakli Kakabadze is a widely published poet, dramatist, novelist, and story writer, a pacifist and civil rights activist who has been beaten and jailed 5 times for his writing and related activities. Some years ago, he took a master's degree from George Mason University in conflict resolution, and the class he will teach for the government department will center on the arts and conflict resolution. That's in the spring semester. But he is here this afternoon to read from his poetry, from his fiction and his poetry, for it was his creative writing, and particularly a play he wrote in 2005 called Candidate Jokola, which brought down the wrath of the Georgian government and forced him and his family into exile. The fact that Georgia is tragically in the news nowadays only underlines what the City of Asylum program has understood from the start. There are places in this world where if you put a pen to paper, honestly put a pen to paper, someone will put a gun to your head. In inviting Irakli Kakabadze to come spend 2 years with us, we hope we are putting him out of the reach of those guns. We sincerely hope in these United States of ours there are no people with guns whose fondest and darkest desire is to silence writers. That is the premise upon which the Ithaca City of Asylum program was founded. That here in our enlightened little town, writers could write the heart's truth without fear of violence being done to them. That is our premise, and that is our hope, which, if we take for granted, we may discover that we become asylum seekers ourselves, and that writers like the Georgian Irakli Kakabadze speak for us all. Rocky.
First of all, I would like to thank everyone here, and I would like to thank ICOA board, the wonderful people that have decided to host me and my family for the last 2 years. And I would like to thank personally everyone who was involved in this, wonderful people who are here. You know, I could name them by the names, but I really, really very much appreciate their help. Everyone, you know, I see David here, I see Edward, Kenny, and Bridget is not here, and Jamie, and all the wonderful people on the board. I also would like to thank Cornell community and government department, which has been wonderful angels to me, and they have even given me an office. I could have never imagined that I'd have an office in the government department, though I've taught in Georgia for some years, the conflict resolution, but I have been associated with Peace Studies program, wonderful people there, and I really would like to thank them very much too. I'd like to thank the city of Ithaca very much. We really love the city. We have been here for 3.5 months, and seems to be one of the few ideal cities for someone estranged to be a pacifist and writer and political hooligan, non-violent, although at the same time there are not very many places like city of Ithaca, not very many enlightened places like city of Ithaca in the world, and really great example of that was when you had Nabokov here in 1950s. So I would like to thank all of you, and I would like to thank wonderful musicians, Eric and Maurice, who gracefully agreed to to share the stage with me, and we just met once, and I would like to apologize for my very bad Georgian English, and I would like to, in the beginning, I would like to say that intent of this story is to show what I feel, but I've done it in Georgian, so some of our friends, Kenny, has helped me to put it into understandable English, although it was impossible to do it. But I hope some of it became possible. And before I start relating my story, I would like to say that right now, of course, the war is going on in Georgia, but this story was written 1 year in advance in Georgian, so it is not a true story. It's invention, and if someone thinks it's true, I apologize, but really it is an invention, and it is completely a lie designed by author. It is called Gurian Story of Ernesto Ecologist versus Umberto Ecologist. I am going to tell you the story about two men who tried to fight the good fight for the preservation of culture and nature. But before we get into the action, I'd like to explain a little history of a small country called Georgia. Well, CNN has done that for me. I'll repeat. Located between Russia, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia has a long, colorful past with 2,500 years of history. At times, it was a part of Greek, Roman, Persian, Arab, Byzantine, Mongol, Ottoman, and Russian empires. At other times, small times, it was independent. Today, it is ruled by neo-preservative party that is aspiring to preserve everything that is new. The government that aspires to join military alliances is very anxious to defend its borders. Because of this, the government has instituted a surveillance program that monitors all of its citizens, searching for enemies of the state and liquidating them whenever necessary, just as they did in the good old days of Joseph Stalin, a humble butcher's son from city of Gori. In order to convince the current generation of Georgians of the need for state surveillance, the government created patriotic camps that educate citizens in the wisdom of its policies. But at the time, it needs to maintain a facade of democracy to qualify for membership in the Western military alliances. So the president brags that in 1918, Georgians were the first ever country that elected social democratic government, and that its citizens are some of the most progressive people on the planet. We are not talking about Stalin here. We are referring to two thinkers on the Georgian left, Ernesto and Umberto, an ecologist and a semiotician, and the area where they live. At the foothills of a lesser Caucasus in southwestern Georgia, there is a wonderful place called Guria, filled with incredible oranges, tea, and some of the greatest political minds in the world. In the time of the great writer Egnaten Inoshvili, about a century ago, Guria was extremely poor, and it remained poor until God sent the Baku-Supsa oil pipeline, which carries Azerbaijani oil to the west. As the old saying goes, 3 out of 5 Gurians are politicians. And according to the Gurian Bureau of Statistics, 74% of the world's most progressive ideas began in Guria. In 1860s, Gurian peasants were the first in the Russian Empire to publicly call for the abolition of serfdom. In 1905, Gurians were quick to respond to the first sounds of revolution. And in 1917, they were in the vanguard of the revolution against the Tsar. It is no surprise that Filipe Maharadze, Georgia's communist leader from 1923 to 1928, was so close to Lenin, Stalin, and even Kaganovich, all those distinguished members of Soviet Politburo. The towns of Chokhatauri, Lanchkhuti, and Ozurgeti are especially rich with political animals and are considered the center of Gurian intellectual life. Chokhatauri, which is at the highest altitude, generates the greatest amount of political discourse, as professors at Tbilisi State University are proud to repeat. Some people go even further, asserting that Gurian women were primarily responsible for the breakup of Soviet Union. Rather than backing either NATO on Warsaw or Warsaw Pact during the Cold War, which one of them was necessary, they decided to ally themselves with the non-aligned movement. And Yugoslavia's Marshal Tito, its most sexually appealing leader, showing their support by screaming, Tito! And in Georgian it goes like this, Tito, 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 Tito. And in English translation it means, Tito, Tito, Tito. All of us can do. Tito, Tito, Tito. Let's go to Kathmandu. And so they were screaming Titu in very secret locations. They decided to collectively scream Titu, especially after their orgasms, which according to Gurian Bureau of Developmental Statistics, Gurian women experienced about 7.5% higher than average women during the former Soviet Union. They started chanting Titu in 1960 and continued doing it for 32 years until the Soviet Union ceased to exist. Since then, the primary goal of chanting Titu has been to fight a global imperialism, and Gurian women have taken the lead in developing new types of chants and orgasms directed against international imperialism and multinational corporations seeking to exploit developing countries. Gurian women are widely known for their athletic prowess, and the first soccer match in Guria, in the city of Poti, played in 1901 between Gurian women and Mingrelian men, ended with the women's on top, 12-11. Whether the game was actually fixed by the men and women remains a question, is a matter of dispute, because there exists not very persuasive evidence of sexual favor given by captain of a Gurian team to the captain of a Mingrelian team on the second day ashore the Palyastomi Lake. And that remained a major topic of conversation in Guria until the October Revolution of 1917 overshadowed it within the news forecasts. The achievements of Gurian women is remarkable, but Guria is not just proud of its women. The former Soviet foreign minister Edward Shevardnadze was also Gurian, from the little village of Mamati, and the main protagonist of our story are also two Gurian male. Famous historian Eftime Takaishvili was also Gurian, as well as Angel Hartina Takaishvili, who does lots of good things, is also Gurian. There are many wonderful Gurians in the world, but we are going to focus on just two Gurian men. maybe we're going to bring the third one into the story. Ernesto Tchartishvili, one of the most progressive thinkers in Guria, is the founder of the Gurian Ecological Association and the Gurian Green Party. His nickname is Ernesto Ecologist, and his biggest challenger on the left is Caius Julius Caesar Nakashidze, the most prominent Gurian postmodernist thinker and professor of semiotics at the universities of Lanchkhuti, Ozurgeti, and Chokatauri. As a disciple of Umberto Eco, Nakashidze was given the nickname Umberto Ecologist. Ernesto and Umberto met in the early 80s while watching a porn film in the apartment of mutual friend Gizo Kuchuloria. The movie, which had been smuggled from capitalist Turkey, sparked an argument about the role of women and men in postmodern society. And in the 3 decades that followed, Ernesto and Umberto ecologists haven't stopped fighting over different intellectual issues. Their more formal philosophical debates, recorded by a graduate student at Lanchkhuti University, Makwala Chechelidze, were some of the most spectacular conversations held since Plato, Socrates, and others. We will not bother you with the complete transcripts, which will be sold in all major bookstores by the end of the year. Instead, our goal is to present a broader picture of this historic confrontation on the left of the Gurian politics. We start with their biographies. Named after Ernesto Che Guevara, Ernesto Tchartishvili was born in 1959 in the city of Chokatauri. Che was already a hero in the former Soviet Union, as you can imagine, just before the Cuban Revolution. So his parents admired Che's spirits and hoped that their son, who was conceived during a particularly successful T2 chanting, would become an uncompromising enemy of exploitation. As an undergraduate at Chokatauri State University, Ernesto discovered that he did not like fishing as much as he liked observing fish, and quickly received recognition as one of the Georgia's most brilliant young scientists, earning his PhD with a dissertation on climate change in a Black Sea basin. He dedicated himself to defending environment during an early campaign for animal rights when he launched a struggle against British Petroleum, which hadn't sufficiently protected ecosystems around its Gurian pipeline. A series of sit-ins and boycotts led to negotiations with BP and a resounding T2 as the oil giant instituted additional safety measures. It was Ernesto's first major victory, and he became absolutely convinced that there were many more to come, not just for him, but for all Guria. Ernesto embraced the whole human race, though he chose not to have a bourgeois family and preferred not to be bothered by anything other than saving the planet. But while he embraced leftist environmentalism, he was thoroughly opposed by the new identity politics, which he saw as a distraction from the larger issues of class and ecology. "I argue for human ecology," he often said, "because this world is getting so much smaller. We need labor standards and environmental codes that can be applied uniformly around the world." So he pushed government councils in Chokatauri, Lanchkhuti, and Ozurgeti to adopt a policy of every pigeon counts, which prohibited hunting during 11 months of every year. Of course, the local police chief, who was neo-preservative, was extremely corrupt, making sure all lawbreakers were unpunished. But in public, he always praised Ernesto as the man who saved Guria and its environment. He even helped raise the funds for a monument to the Gurian chicken, which was erected in front of the Archbishop's residence in Ozurgeti, and introduced Ernesto to Lisa Maria Glonti, or Duali, as one might say, one of Guria's most beautiful prostitutes, with whom Ernesto immediately fell in love. For years, it worked out well. Ernesto was one of the most popular people in all of Guria and was convinced he was also the most progressive. But after the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1992, Ernesto had only one problem, a serious problem. And this problem was called Umberto Ecologist. Also born in 1959, Umberto's proper name was Gaius Julius Caesar Nakashidze, and his parents were descended from Gurian aristocracy. The Nakashidzes named him Caesar out of contempt for Bolsheviks that took so many of their relatives and never hid their disdain for the revolution. At 16, Caesar became interested in linguistics, and at 34 received his PhD from Ozurgeti Semiotics Institute with a comparative analysis of Umberto Eco and Noam Chomsky. As Umberto Ecologist, a nickname bestowed by the Ozurgeti Times, he started to oppose Russian cultural imperialism in 1980s when he galvanized opposition throughout Guria. He created a circle of independent Gurian cultural relativist societies which used semiotics to oppose the dominant Soviet ideology of a classless proletarian society. Instead, they believed that every human being was an entire different universe, and using Gurians as the perfect prototype for human beings, argued for equality of all people and all narratives. From the educated hills of Ozurgeti, he opposed Ernesto's calls for energy conservation. Cultural identity was the central part of Umberto's discourse, which valued cultural preservation over the globalization of understanding. And in opposition to Ernesto's universal ecological language, Umberto took a localized approach to Gurian liberation movement. Working with Georgia's neo-preservative government, Umberto created a free cultural zone in Bakhmaro, a mountain resort favored by Gurian supply-siders. In Bakhmaro, a museum was built to honor Guria's Kolkh kingdom, whose soldiers fought Greece's Argonauts, and Umberto, of course, eloquently took the side of Medea in her relationship with the sexist imperialist Greek Jason, who not only stole the technology for producing gold, but also took her copyright to the word of medicine. He insisted that the lesbians of the earliest myths were from Guria and found a grave of two women making love dated to the 5th century BC when Greeks were trying to colonize Kolchida. Umberto even advocated drilling in the Sufsa region of Georgia, when dozen Texas oilmen visited the region in search of oil, to the delight of the Georgian president and neo-preservatives. The only condition Umberto was made to demand they change their Texas accents for Gurian ones as a change of identity, which they did in exactly 73 days after hard work. They wanted to drill so badly that they almost became Gurians with their accents, though they were never accepted by the Gurian lesbian community, which found the Texans too conservative for their 5th century BC lifestyle. Like Ernesto, Umberto did not believe in marriage. And while patronizing the Lanchuti brothel, favored by Ernesto, he accidentally fell in love with the same Lisa Maria Vaali, who was a fan of progressivism, gave each the discounted rate, which was about half of the fee she charged to the corrupt government bureaucrats. Like Ernesto, Umberto began considering himself the most progressive thinker in the area. Both he and Ernesto were called postmodernists by the major Gurian literary journals, but each took a pleasure in denying their own postmodernism and trashing the other as a lousy postmodernist. Ernesto called himself a man of action, making a name for himself by organizing protests, even chaining himself to the entrances of multinational corporations, calling them binzuris, which in Georgian means dirty people. Meanwhile, Umberto proudly pronounced himself the most cunning linguist in all of Guria, as well as its greatest theoretician of cunnilingus, winning number of competition in research of this subject. His writing and debating skills were extraordinary, so no one enjoyed arguing with Umberto, and it took little effort for him to completely destroy any author or position that opposed him. But in private, each of two main heroes faced his old demons, which was why their romances with other women other than Lisa Maria Vaali rarely worked. Umberto had a problem with body gases, and Ernesto had a problem with gas corporations. At the early stages of their relationships, Umberto always experienced excessive flatulence in bed, while Ernesto found himself easily distracted from sex by going after evil oil corporations. As you can imagine, this did not add to their female partners' numbers. Only Lisa Maria Vaali, a genius in her own right, could handle them both. Widely considered in Chokhatauri and Ozurgeti as the most intellectually, spiritually sensitive prostitute in Guria since 1901, when Tamara Kupunia died after a bicycle accident, Vaali loved to discuss global warming and chaos theory with her clients, using occasional digressions to deconstruct the major political theories of 20th century. Endowed with supernatural powers of sexual healing, Vaali considered herself a rightful descendant of Medea. She claimed to be great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Medea and also a first Georgian prime minister, which was never proved by historians. But Ernesto and Umberto both truly and completely believed in this story. This was actually the only point where they completely agreed. It was the one point where these two never argued, and in fact they both spoke of Lisa Maria Vaali as their love and romantic ideal. Vaali easily adapted to both natural and corporate gas attacks, wielding a diversified portfolio of approaches. Neither Ernesto nor Umberto could perform sexually without 45 minutes of intellectual foreplay. With Ernesto, she held forth on biology, and with Umberto, she discussed the divergence of signifier and signified in historical linguistics. Lisa Maria regularly started her week with Ernesto, spending Monday and Tuesday with him, resting on Wednesday, and setting aside Thursday and Friday for Umberto. Of course, nobody bothered her on the weekends, which she dedicated to philosophical investigations into the future of Gurian post-structuralism. But all the while, there was another side of the Vaali, who was quietly being paid by the government to keep these two leftists content. The bureaucrats were afraid of all three, but especially of the Vaali, whose services were necessary to keep the other two from reaching a wider audience. The competition between Ernesto and Umberto reached its peak when Ernesto made an impassioned speech against BP in Supsa, where he decried our own cultural relativists on the left, like Umberto ecologists, with the given name of Caesar, who contribute as much to pollution as all right-wingers put together. Umberto was deeply offended and wrote a number of scathing columns for Ozurgeti Times. He called Ernesto a so-called leftist with close ties to the local police department, a fake who wants everyone to be the same in the name of nature. Like his namesake Ernesto Che Guevara, Ernesto ecologist does not want to recognize the right of others to be different. It is Bolshevism in the name of environmentalism. Considering the fact that both remained in love with the same prostitute for the next 7.5 months, the debate became a major story not just for Chokhatauri and Ozurgeti, but for all Guria. Ernesto even moved his sit-in campaign from BP headquarters to the Ozurgeti Times office, where he made agitated speeches in front of bewildered Ozurgetians. And of course, Umberto responded in print, mocking Ernesto in columns that boosted Ozurgeti Times circulation from 5,000 to 12,000. Ernesto, who blamed the conflict on the multinational polluters, abandoned nonviolence, vowing to fight to death. Umberto responded in kind, taking up arms against cultural imperialists on both right and left who wanted to make the world uniformly mediocre. Up to that point, the government has tolerated Ernesto and Umberto, touting them to the Western press as examples of Georgian's free-thinking democracy. But when the oil companies threatened to take their business elsewhere, if the polemics in the streets of Guria could not be stopped, Governor Cuculic Guaseli intervened. After months of bitter exchanges among the most progressive minds of Guria, the governor invited both parties to the negotiating table and drafted a ceasefire to preserve the Gurian economy. In return for signing the agreement, Ernesto and Humberto were given generous grants to continue their research. And even though the government of Guria was as reactionary as that of a central government of Georgia, a final agreement was signed in the presence of Governor Cuculic Guaseli. A friendly soccer game was scheduled between the supporters of Ernesto and Humberto. And Buthuzi Gogichaishvili, here's the third Gurian that comes into the play, who had spent 14 years as a professional soccer player, agreed to referee. Buthuzi, an extreme isolationist, anti-Masonic, libertarian tendencies, vociferously opposed multilingual education, European Union, NAFTA, and oral sex. Buthuzi hated Russian imperialism but loved his wife, who weighed about 160 kilograms, and insisted on feeding him a traditional Gurian diet. Members of local government agreed with many of his nationalist ideas, but since they all dreamed of someday becoming Freemasons and joining NATO, they were afraid to give him much public support. In this instance, they found a very good place for Buthuzi to support him materially, but at the same time to keep him content. They found him placed in a midfield between Ernesto and Humberto. Historic soccer match was held on August 14th with 10,000 people, local residents of course, in the stadium. And though Lisa Marie did not believe in competition, both Ernesto and Humberto saw the contest as the only way to win the heart of the most beautiful woman in Georgia. At the first possession, Ernesto started screaming obscenities about oil corporations. And Humberto began, sorry for that expression, farting. Because both of them were very nervous. They wanted to win a match and win the heart of their beloved woman, the greatest prize of that football game. The intensity of the game was tremendous. But after 18 scoreless minutes, Buthuzi, who was a referee, was ordered to stop the game, and police evacuated everyone from a stadium. The governor announced that Georgia had declared war against witches, ordering all men under the age of 50 to join the army and suspending all newspapers and television shows for an indefinite period of time. Meanwhile, the president proclaimed that Georgia needed to defeat witches in order to maintain national security, and vowed the war would continue until witches were defeated in every region of Georgia, which means Abkhazeti, Achara, Imereti, Javacheti, Kacheti, Kartli, Khefsureti, Tiuleti, Raja, Samachablo, Samegrelo, Samtsche, Svaneti, Tusheti, Chevi, and of course, Guria. Countless women were arrested and forced to have sex with the president. Those who survived were condemned as witches, and those who didn't went to heaven. Because he was the darling of the press, it was called security measures with love from presidents. All the women were obliged to obey this kind of torture, and their only hope was that president would not notice them. By the order of president, Ernesto, Umberto, and Buthuzi were assigned to the Gurian Legion of witch hunters. Stationed at Palyastomi Lake, they were instructed to shoot down any and all flying objects which were assumed to be terrorist witches. And like good soldiers, they complied. Ernesto believed the witches were in fact the multinational Binzuris, or dirty people. So he put a great effort into shooting them down. Umberto, who saw the witches as cultural imperialists trying to wash away differences between the nations, shot with equal fervor. Buthuzi swore the witches were Freemasons whom he blamed for the degradation of the world and decline of Gurian life. Every time they saw something in the sky, they shot, and every week they requested more ammunition. Though the first 2 years, the war, Ernesto, Umberto, and Buthuzi fired a record number of bullets. In Lachhuti, a local arms dealer began turning a huge profit. And even though Ernesto, Umberto, and Buthuzi didn't shoot down a single witch or something that looked like a witch, the government was proud to pour money into Guria, using it to demonstrate the superiority of fighting multinational cultural imperialist Freemasons rather than engaging in diplomacy, and ceremoniously promoting Buthuzi to the rank of general in the Air Force of Neo-Preservative Movement. Arms merchants prospered. The president had lots of sex, and thousands of soldiers died from seemingly supernatural causes. As the fighting continued, with Guria's men on the front lines and its women in detention, a new sense of security descended on Chokhatauri. On the second day of the war, Lisa Maria Vaali was arrested on suspicion of being a witch and sent to a detention camp in western Guria. And though Ernesto and Umberto never found the courage to talk about her again, they fought bravely on, aiming their guns at anything that might be a witch. Thank you. I want to, besides this piece, which is in a way kind of tragic, because when I wrote this, there was no war, but right now there is a war in Georgia. And we have a tragic situation there. But I want to us to have a little more fun, because I don't want it to be totally tragic. So try to be funny there, but I've got some stuff that we have worked a little bit, which is called the polyphonic blues. And I'll tell you shortly about what it is. It's a Georgian traditional folk song, which we took into another dimension. And we have different narratives at the same time. Georgian folk songs have, and Kenny knows about that, and I'm sure some of you have listened to the Georgian folk songs. There are different voices coming at the same time, different songs in a one song. And they are, those diverse voices create a harmony at the same time. We haven't done that. And that's done by them much better than anyone else, especially myself. I'm not a singer. I'm a performance artist with poetry and prose, just as equipment. But we are trying to do different narratives at the same time. So they could create one whole together work of art. So with your permission for that performance, can I take this out? First, we're going to do a live performance of the poem called Natalie Avery in both Georgian and English. And then I would like to ask our friends to help us with the recording. But after this one is called Natalie Avery. ნატალი ავერი არის ძალიან უხერი და თანაც მშვენიერი რევოლუციონერი. ხანაც ვარდისფერი და ხანაც ცისფერი. ის ყოველთვის მღერის და არის ბედნიერი. ნატალი ავერი სულ არ არის შტერი, სულ არ არის ბერი და არ ყავს ბევრი მტერი. ხმა აქვს ყინულმჭრელის, კანი ყირვარ წვერის, ბევრი აქვს ნაწერი და დაუკრავს კვერი. არავისთვის ნატალი ავერი არის სუფთა ჰაერი, ვერ აწუხებს მტერი და სიტყვა უშვერი. მისი მეცნიერი ჭედლიშვილი ლერი და მშვენება ერის შერვაში ძემერი. ნატალი ავერი არის ჩვენი ჭერი, ნატალი ავერი არის ესო ხერი და ძალიან მშვენიერი რევოლუციონერი. Now English indirect translation. She's Natalie Avery. She's very, very, very extraordinary, revolutionary. She's not a Virgin Mary. She's not a sinful Sherry. She's just an emissary from this abundant fairy. She's Natalie a very, 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 very joyful emissary from this abundant fairy. She's very, very caring. She's very, very merry. And when she talks to Perry, she's never ever swearing. She's Natalie a very, 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 very extraordinary, revolutionary. She's Natalie a very. She was very, very sharing and worth of lot of staring. No matter what she's wearing, she's Natalie a very, 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 very extraordinary, revolutionary. Thank you. So I guess now we're gonna play the one polyphonic blues and then we'll be done. This is called Deconstruction Blues. First part is not playing, but that's cool. Varmateb, Kharmateb, Armateb, Guarmateb, Tarmateb, Tarmateb, Sharmateb, Armateb, Varmateb, Armateb, Shalmateb, Harmateb, Tarmateb, Varmateb, Charmateb, Almateb, Banmateb, Qualmateb, Herzalmateb. Main Street, needs some weed, and also it needs to feed people who are pressed by greed, change ideas of mainstream, and to have more decent dream. And we need to scream to challenge power-hungry team, well to do elites, defend some ugly deeds. We need to plant good seed in order not to bleed. Christmas Eve, we are never gonna leave, we are always gonna fight for the basic human right. Would you like to see the Pope? Would you like to buy some salt? Would you like to have some hope? Would you like to smoke some dope? You don't want to be some shark, you just want to make some mark. You just want to go to park and make love to Mary Clark. She's an anthropologist in San Diego University. Very good. Main Street, need some weed. It's on me. That's what they always say. And also, it is to feed those who are oppressed by greed. And we go. Oh. And this is a translation of what I just said. I think I am done, so I'll sorry.